The other night, I woke up at 4 a.m. from a bad dream. You know the feeling. Way too early, the pit in your stomach, your mind already spinning. Back to sleep? Not a chance. So I reached for my phone. Yeah, big mistake. I found my feeds filled with friends and family in Minneapolis, heartbroken and terrified. I read personal stories of families torn apart over politics, parents of young children wanting to take to the streets but too afraid to leave their families behind. Local news reports describing war zones and memes of grandmothers throwing slices of bologna. Don't read the comments. Oh, too late. We're way past that point. Then the national headlines. Trump administration sending 1,500 more ICE agents. Governor Walz puts Minnesota National Guard on standby. Pentagon readies 1,500 troops for deployment to Minneapolis. And then that wave of existential dread flooded my body, and I thought, is this what civil war feels like? Dear Lord, whose side am I on? Am I someone's enemy? Is that someone my neighbor? Absurdist philosopher Albert Camus' famous quote, "Should I kill myself or have a cup of coffee?" emphasizes that choosing to live, even just for coffee, requires more courage than succumbing to despair. So, like any fool of the modern age, I got up, poured myself a cup, and set out to understand how we got here and how to pave a peaceful path forward. Because right now, much like the existential threats posed by the advancements of AI, it feels like we're standing on the edge of something we might not come back from. Part 1, the beginning of post-truth America. For 40 years after World War II, American broadcasters operated under the Fairness Doctrine. If you aired controversial opinions of public importance, you were required by law to present contrasting viewpoints. It wasn't perfect, but it created a journalistic standard. Balance mattered. In 1987, Reagan repealed it. The rationale seemed reasonable at the time. Critics said it was chilling free speech, that broadcasters avoided controversial topics entirely just to escape the regulatory burden. Plus, with cable and satellite TV exploding, we didn't need the government forcing balance anymore. The expanding media marketplace of ideas would sort itself out, right? But removing that requirement fundamentally reshaped American media. It paved the way for partisan talk radio and cable news analysis. Suddenly, broadcasters could build entire business models targeting specific ideological or political niches. Within a year after the repeal of the Fairness Doctrine, the Rush Limbaugh Show went into national syndication and soon became the highest-rated talk radio show of all time. Now anyone could build an entire media empire on pure outrage and vitriol, no questions asked. You could get rich by spending 3 hours a day telling people that women, minorities, journalists, and professors were the enemy of American democracy. The left was coming for you and your way of life. Your freedom and individual liberties were in jeopardy, unless, of course, you joined the fight and became a ditto head. I was in my early teens when I first heard these ideas while riding to work with my father, Rush Limbaugh on the radio, rage laughing about the ridiculous feminazis. But I could never understand why any of it was funny. I had been brought up to believe that good Americans had died for equality for everyone. Wasn't that what sets us apart from the rest of the uncivilized world? And through the next few formative years of my life, I watched my father adopt this ideology as his own. It was confusing because I knew him very differently than this. Like most radicalizations, this didn't make him a bad person. He was still the same old dad. It just made him more, I don't know, something else. More certain about invisible enemies, I guess. More concerned about them and they instead of us and we. I was a little too young for any of this to be a political issue, but I was made to feel like we were on different sides of something. I just never understood the point of it. Even as a kid, all I could think was, who is they? Women wanting equal pay? Homosexuals wanting equal rights? Affirmative action recipients? This is what upsets you? You feel threatened by this? Come on, man. That's malarkey. All right. Daddy issues aside, Rush Limbaugh's hilarious vitriol did much more than create some side-eye glances between a father and his son. The repeal of the Fairness Doctrine changed everything, not just politics, but American culture itself. Over the next 35 years, the mainstream media created an America that can no longer agree on what's true. The profitability of polarization was simply too great for commercial media to avoid exploiting it. And now, the pitting of Americans against Americans has brought state-sponsored violence right into the streets of our cities. To better understand this better, I'll give you a brief history of how it all played out, followed by how it has all affected me personally. I'm sure many of you will relate to my story, and many of you will be triggered. I can't wait to read the comments. Part 2, the political polarization of reality. By 1990, Limbaugh proved that blaming the left for manufacturing controversial social issues just so they could increase the size of the government through regulation was lightning in a bottle. I mean, it's really not that complicated. It's so much easier to blame someone else for your problems than face them head on. By 1994, Newt Gingrich proved this fresh narrative could win elections, becoming the first Republican Speaker of the House in 4 decades. Before Gingrich, bipartisan collaboration was normal. Republicans and Democrats worked together on major legislation. The committee system was decentralized. Individual members could shape policy regardless of party. But through the Republican Revolution of the 1990s, Rush's audience became Gingrich's political army. And this wasn't just changing how Congress worked. It changed how Americans found identity and how they saw one another. Gingrich changed the game. Politics became warfare. Obstruction became strategy. Division became everything. He centralized power within his party, demanded party line voting, and turned compromise into betrayal. 2 years later, Fox News launched in 1996, making partisan outrage a 24/7 operation. Soon after, the internet arrived, and before too long, the message boards picked up on the hype, and the Tea Party movement was born. Leveraging the power of online community building, grassroots anti-left rallies began popping up all across rural America, and Fox News covered it. Alaskan Governor Sarah Palin adopted this new brand of folksy patriotism and skyrocketed to the top. Suddenly, being conservative meant gaudy fashion and loud behavior, more than actual policy positions and responsible governance. And then came the guy who played this game better than anyone else in history. I will never forget the golden escalator in 2015. Donald Trump slinging personal insults at his opponents, promising to build a wall to keep out Mexican rapists and criminals, vowing to make America great again. And I thought to myself, someone is finally breaking through the partisan noise and has a real chance at healing our fractured society, and it's Donald, you're fired, Trump. He embodied the madness. He leveraged controversy at every turn. With the help of the mainstream anti-left propaganda dominating American media, he converted the boring old partisan mudslinging into a post-truth public relations juggernaut of alternative facts and conspiracy theories. That was 10 years ago, and he was just getting started. Part 3, I really don't like picking sides. 20 years prior to the Escalator ride, during the late 90s and early aughts, I worked my way into the back room at the campus bike shop while going to college in Madison. The full-time lifer mechanics were all college-educated, critical-thinking freethinkers who had chosen shop life over corporate careers. We'd spend our days listening to community-sponsored public radio, both local and national, with international reporting from the BBC and a daily dose of Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman. This environment was very different than anything I've experienced before, and I absolutely loved it. I much preferred this alternative, independent media exposure over the corporate-sponsored media of my youth. Regardless of this preference, I always found it a bit too insufferable and pretentious to buy into it. It really wasn't hard for me to see where Rush was coming from and why everybody liked him so much. And when I expressed this to my coworkers, they labeled me a conservative and gave me the nickname the Bowling Republican. And honestly, that bothered me a lot less than being called a liberal by my conservative friends today. Ironically, through the Obama years, I was working for my father as an outside sales rep selling industrial chemicals across the Midwest. It was the good life of golf outings, steak dinners, and expense accounts. And if there's anything that I love as much as bicycles, it's golf. So I joined a small private golf club near my house. Now on the surface, the country club environment is the polar opposite of the back room of a college town bike shop. But I loved it just the same. In many ways, I preferred the straightforward ambition and rugged individualism of golfers over the performative self-righteousness of bicycle mechanics. Regardless of this preference, it wasn't hard for me to see where the bike shop guys were coming from either. Look, I can hang with conservatives just fine, and I genuinely enjoy their company. But I always find them a bit insensitive and arrogant as well. And just like the guys at the bike shop, I let them know it. So they called me a Democrat. One of them even called me left of Stalin, which is so good, I can't even be mad about it. Now, why am I telling you all this? Because for me, it's never been political. But it sure seems political for everyone else. And when they drag me into their fight, it becomes personal. And that's when I become defensive. For years, I navigated both worlds just fine. Foolishly, I absolutely insist on making this work. We can all see things our own way and still go for a ride and play a round of golf. You know, as fellow Americans. But something shifted after the 2016 election. Yeah, my family was one of those families at Thanksgiving. The kids were talking about how the bullies at school were making fun of the Latino kids and how their parents would soon be deported and they would become orphans. My parents blamed the parents of the bullies, and I simply suggested, if that's true, President-elect Trump's rhetoric emboldened their mindset. And that's all it took. They got up and walked out. The fissure became obvious. The line had been drawn, and my side had been picked for me. Now, I no longer worked for my father at this point, and I had hit a rough patch in my life, so I took a 10-year break from golf for financial reasons. But I rebuilt my life, and in 2024, I thought maybe things had cooled down a bit with Biden and whatever. So I rejoined the club, and we all know what happened that November. Regardless, they all welcomed me back with open arms, and I absolutely loved it. I played 100 rounds of golf last summer. Politics came up less than a handful of times. Mostly just dumb jokes people brushed off. And I'm still the hippie at the golf course, sharing carts with guys wearing Trump hats. I think it's absolutely ridiculous to wear a hat with some other guy's name on it the same way that Rush Limbaugh thought the pink ribbons were just performative. But that doesn't mean we can't enjoy the day together. At the end of the summer, on September 10th, 2025, I walked onto the first tee with my usual group like any other beautiful September afternoon, ready for a nice round of golf before the guys headed south for the winter. When suddenly, out of the blue, a prominent member, someone with real standing at the club, comes out of the clubhouse and shouts to one of my playing partners, "Hey Joe, did you see? They killed our boy." Those 3 words cut me like a knife. And in that one short sentence, since I knew they hadn't caught the killer yet, and because Charlie Kirk definitely wasn't my boy, I must be they. And once again, my side had become picked for me. I felt sick, and I still get sick thinking about it. You see, until that day, I'd barely known who Charlie Kirk was. South Park had just spoofed him a month before, Cartman master debating in his bedroom, rage-baiting college girls online for clicks. And that's all I knew about the guy. Just another internet troll profiting from division politics. But to them, he was a uniter, a hero, the next Martin Luther King Jr., but not a racist. A true Christian patriot gunned down by the radical left. And suddenly, I'm feeling like the enemy at my own country club. Not because of anything I'd done or said, just because everyone else has decided there are 2 sides to everything, and if you're not clearly on one, you must be on the other. And I guess this is what the civil Cold War feels like up close. Not bullets, not battle lines, just the slow, grinding realization that the people around you, people you like, people you respect, people you love, insist on seeing you as the enemy, and they don't even know they're doing it, which for me is absolutely heartbreaking. Part 4, the playbook. After Trump lost the 2020 election, something else was happening at the Heritage Foundation, an influential right-wing think tank based in Washington. Unlike previous election cycles, this time the Republican Party didn't take a step back to regroup. They got to work devising a plan to make sure it will never happen again. Over the next 4 years, they drafted Project 2025, a 900-page blueprint for dismantling the administrative state and installing a one-party authoritarian government. The goal is explicit. When Trump is re-elected in 2024, they could hit the ground running. No transition, no democratic procedure, just raw, unadulterated execution. And here's the thing. This isn't some fringe conspiracy theory document. It was written by people who now hold the most powerful positions in our government. Russell Vought, the chief architect who led the executive branch takeover strategy, is now director of the Office of Management and Budget. He controls the federal purse strings. And Stephen Miller, key architect and political strategist, is back as senior advisor, shaping everything from immigration to domestic policy. Tom Homan, who wrote the border policy sections, is now the White House border czar. Brendan Carr wrote the FCC reform chapter. He now leads the agency. John Ratcliffe contributed to intelligence reform. He's nominated to run the CIA. Ben Carson, Peter Navarro, the list goes on and on. These guys aren't just advisors, they're the authors implementing their own script. And according to the Project 2025 Progress Tracker online, we are already 51% through the checklist after the first year. And suddenly, I'm back to that 4 a.m. dread. My feed's filled with friends and family in Minneapolis describing the streets of their American city as a war zone as they watch their neighbors get dragged from their houses, afraid to step outside of their own. And rightfully so, because their eyes don't lie, and Minneapolis is in the script. Not specifically, but literally, and you can read it for yourself. Project 2025 explicitly calls for deploying federal forces to cities deemed unable to govern themselves, specifically targeting liberal cities that don't align themselves with the Trump administration. The justification? Fraud, crime, and immigration. These are all common problems that all cities have. The conservative propaganda tells us they're cleaning up the messes created by failed democratic immigration policy, which isn't entirely untrue, but the deployment of over 2,000 ICE agents to a liberal city 1,500 miles from our southern border points more towards authoritarian political retribution. Of the estimated 14 million unauthorized immigrants in the U.S., only 130,000 of them live in Minnesota. In Republican-run Texas, there are over 2 million. That's less than 0.1% versus 14%. If this was really about mass deportation, why aren't they going for the low-hanging fruit in a state that would welcome them with open arms? Part 5, what hasn't worked? As mentioned, I really hate abandoning reality and jumping into their fight, and sometimes I slip. I'm as guilty as the next guy of making knee-jerk social media posts drawing historical parallels to authoritarian takeovers by calling MAGAs Nazis and fascists. Also, not entirely untrue, but despite being historically evident, this only makes it worse. It only validates their narrative, digging them deeper and deeper into their positions, making it harder to find common ground. And most Democrats really seem to understand this, because, hey, where are all the evil Democrats anyway? Seriously, someone really needs to show me influential voices of power on the left calling for the elimination of the fascist MAGA scumbags wearing blue hats and dressing like fools. I honestly didn't hear a single Democratic leader say that Charlie Kirk was asking to be murdered in cold blood for stirring up political conflict on college campuses. But I've definitely heard senior Trump advisor Stephen Miller say that immigrants are poisoning the blood of our country while giving official statements. We've all heard Donald Trump rallying crowds against radical leftist lunatics and wishing them all a happy holidays on Truth Social. And no, Caroline, it's not just hilarious rhetoric. These guys have deployed federal troops to cities of political opponents, and when they shot Renee Good in broad daylight, they called her a fucking bitch and began investigating her family. Fairness Doctrine be damned. Meanwhile, local leaders in Minnesota have reacted with poise by calling for calm and peaceful resistance, not calls to fight like hell like on January 6th. They're showing restraint in the face of genuine provocation. The mantra has been, and continues to be, don't give them what they want. We've got to starve them out. And you know what? They're exactly right. But then what? Part 6, Project 2026. I can't stop imagining if a detailed blueprint like Project 2025 could be created and executed by extremists. Imagine what we could build together with that same clarity and commitment by reasonable Americans, not as revenge, but as restoration. If there really is a left, then who's working on Project 2026 to bring back some normalcy to American politics? Why can't we build something that actually earns the respect of all Americans instead of demanding it through partisan, authoritarian force? The reality is, most people aren't extremists, but everyone knows the system is broken. Most of us share more common ground than we realize. Maybe I'm naive, but I still firmly believe that conservative values and liberal values can coexist when we stop treating each other as enemies and start respecting each other as neighbors. One thing is for certain, all of this has gone way too far. If you're feeling exhausted by all the fighting, so am I. If you're watching relationships fracture and wondering when neighbors became enemies, I understand completely. You are not alone. Unfortunately, I don't have the plan. The only thing I can think to do is share my story and seek out community. So here I am, now let me have it.